Bruce Wayne. Why are you dressed up like Batman?
Because he is Batman, you moron.
It's spooky season, everyone, and you know what that means. Time to yap about some Batman. Battober is back in action, baby. Last year we covered Matt Reeves and his back-to-basics Batman-focused universe, but this time I want to take it back to where Batman really became a major film franchise. Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns. Shout out Adam West and his crazy-ass iconic 60s Batman, but these movies are really what catapulted Batman into the tier he's in today, along with Richard Donner's first Superman, Raimi's first Spider-Man, The Dark Knight, and Iron Man 1, it is one of the most important comic book films ever made and one of the biggest reasons for the 21st century superhero bonanza. It is a really big deal. Like, it really cannot be understated just how much of an impact Burton's Batman had on not only the Batman franchise, of course, but just blockbuster movies in general. At the time of its release, Batman 89 was one of the most expensive films ever made, costing a whopping $48 million in 1980s bucks, which today is worth more than that. And it paid off. Batman fever was at an all-time high, and everyone and their mother went to go see the first ever blockbuster Batman film, a movie that promised to bring the character back to his roots and take him seriously in a way that hadn't been done up to that point. And much to everyone's surprise, that's pretty much exactly what that movie did. From the opening sequence deep in the haunted streets of Gotham City, to Michael Keaton's subtle performance as the Dark Knight, to Jack Nicholson's iconic Joker, it was more than anyone could have ever expected, and through the years and many other incarnations, that era is still held up as one of the peaks of the entire series. Rightfully so. Keaton is still one of the more popular Batman, and all the wacky-ass villain performances only seem to get more love over time, especially the two in Batman Returns.
The fly in our ointment.
Ointment. Scented or unscented?
The legacy of those movies just has a whole lot going for it, especially when it was followed up with what many people consider the worst era of movie Batman in the pure insanity of the Joel Schumacher films.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
It sure helps your long-term public perception to get followed by shit like that. So all these years later, the Burton era of Batman is in a lot of ways looked at the same way the Nolan films are. Granted, neither of the Burton films have the cultural impact or legacy of The Dark Knight, but both eras are viewed as these more or less dark, serious high points in the Batman movie franchise. And I'm not here to say that the Burton era isn't all that, but what I am here to talk about is what these films really are, and maybe more importantly, what they're not, and that is dark and serious Batman movies, for the most part. I mean, it's not incorrect to say that these movies have a certain edge to them that did not exist in Batman media prior to their time, outside the comics, of course. It's certainly not Joel Schumacher here, but I think the more the years go by, the more people kind of forget, for lack of better words, just how fucking weird these movies are, and I don't mean that as an insult because I very much like both Batman and Batman Returns, but I think the lasting legacy of those movies has panned out in a way where they aren't as appreciated as they should be for what really makes them great, and that is all the Tim Burton weirdness.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
I love these films not because they're dark or serious or even that great of a depiction of Batman, to be honest, but just for the sheer lunacy that makes up most of the runtime of both of them, especially Batman Returns. Goddamn.
Teach you my French flipper trick.
These are some of the most creative, out there, major Hollywood productions ever made, and frankly, it's a miracle that they even exist in the form they do. So, in the spirit of the Halloween season, let's dive into what is undoubtedly the spookiest on-screen Batman era we have, and get to the root of what made it so unique.
In The Hollywood Reporter was a story about Batman may not be made because the script was just rejected by the studio, and if they don't come up with a better script, then they were going to shelve it, and Bob was devastated by that. He prayed for somebody to come along to get Batman back on its feet, and the someone was Tim Burton.
Now, if you're familiar with both of these films, you know that there is a sharp insanity uptick from the first film to the second. I don't think that could possibly be overstated, and that's no accident because the productions of these two films vary wildly, mainly in how much control Tim Burton was able to exercise. See, when the first film was being batted around the executive offices of 80s film studios, Burton was not much of an established guy yet, only having directed one studio film in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which of course is a banger movie, but it's not quite enough to get you that lifetime Hollywood golden ticket. Batman was not a film that he pitched or even had a script for. This was a classic director-for-hire situation. The film was very much a studio beast, having spent almost a decade post the success of Superman, going through all kinds of different insane ideas. Some serious, most overtly comedic, with directors like Joe Dante and Ivan Reitman being brought on to make a film more in the vein of the old Adam West era. At one point, the idea of Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin was pitched, so that should give you an idea of how directionless this movie was for a long time. Granted, an 80s Bill Murray Batman movie directed by Ivan Reitman does sound amazing in its own strange way. I would love to see it, but this was just one of the many stupid ideas that was being thrown out there prior to Burton being brought on, which after a while, of course, he was. Even still though, the studio was hesitant to give him the green light until they saw the success of Beetlejuice in 1988. So between that and the sheer scale the movie was being produced on, the studio naturally was going to have its fingers all over it, resulting in a film that Burton himself has called occasionally boring and is his personal least favorite of all of his movies. And even though I don't totally agree with that sentiment, it is arguably the least Tim Burton movie ever made, but that's kind of true mostly by default because it's not like this movie lacks the Tim Burton creative stamp. It's just that every other Tim Burton film is practically breaking the Tim Burton meter. He's a guy that just cannot help but make his movies as Tim Burton-y as humanly possible.
It's showtime.
If all of his other films are like a 15 out of 10 on the Tim Burton scale, Batman 89 is simply like a 7 or 8 out of 10, which is still pretty high. Even with all the studio oversight, this movie is still unmistakably a Tim Burton production. And you notice it right from the jump. The opening Danny Elfman theme into the fantastical streets of Gotham City, it has Burton's fingerprints all over it. It's weird, like the movie's production design has this really interesting balance where at times it does look like a gritty, dark, edgy, on the streets 80s New York crime film, especially in the beginning, but as the movie goes on, it slowly turns into this borderline fantasy world that is completely unlike our own. Like, this movie rightfully gets a lot of credit for its incredible set design, especially on the streets of Gotham City, and it's true, it does look great, but aside from a few dark alleys here and there, like 90% of the Gotham you see in both of these movies is this one block where they make announcements and speeches, and I guess every major event in town goes down in. I know it's not meant to look like that, but every time the movie cuts to a scene in Gotham that's not an alleyway, it is so obviously just the same backlot dressed up in a slightly different way, which makes the city seem very small and makes the movie kind of unintentionally comedic in that way. They're always walking down those steps to a crowd of like 20 people to make some kind of announcement, and it just comes off so silly every time.
The pen is truly mightier than the sword.
The production is immaculate, but the tone is just not all that serious, which is why I kind of love it. Tim Burton is just not a super serious guy, and he can't help but inject fun and silly and weird tones into everything he does. So the movie has this amazing push-pull where everything is built to look realistic and gritty. The bones of the movie are very grounded, but the coat of paint Burton puts on it in the tone and characterization is just the opposite. I mean, just just take Batman himself, for example. Again, like everything in this movie, on the surface, he's a seemingly very dark, serious character. He's got an all-black bat suit on, he lowers his voice to disguise himself, he's all mysterious. That's all there, but the more time you spend with him, the more you realize that there really isn't all that much edge to him. I mean, granted, he does blow up a chemical factory full of people, which admittedly is pretty hardcore. Murder is most certainly not an issue for this Batman, but the way he goes about his Batman adventures comes off like he's having fun.
Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight?
He's really not all that much of a tortured guy. He's always got that shit-eating grin on. He puffs his cape up in a real theater kid kind of way to show off how cool his bat suit is. He just seems like he's in it for the love of the game. You don't really see much of a sacrifice he's making by being Batman, which for me personally is why I don't care much for this Batman as a serious Batman adaptation. Like, in my opinion, at the core of Bruce Wayne, there is something fundamentally wrong with him. His drive to be Batman is a curse. His life as Bruce Wayne is not the same as other superhero alter egos. Like, Clark Kent is the real Superman, and he has a perfectly fulfilled, happy life in that identity, but Bruce Wayne is more or less a facade. He's not able to have a meaningful, happy life as his normal self. That's just not in him, but the Keaton Batman, especially in this first one, seems pretty fine, honestly. I mean, he's obviously sad about his parents, and that motivates him to put on the cape and the cowl, but he's pretty chill overall. I mean, he spends the vast majority of this movie focused entirely on Vicky Vale, going on charming dates with her, having a bumbling comedic moment where he tries to find the words to tell her that he's Batman. He brings her to the Batcave. Hell, Alfred even lets her back in the Batcave later in the movie like it's no big deal.
Security? Who let Vicky Vale into the Batcave? I'm sitting there working and I turn around, there she is. Oh, hi Vic, come on in.
Bruce and Alfred are pretty relaxed about the whole thing, honestly. All Alfred even cares about is if Bruce can seal the deal with Vicky, which honestly is a bit weird. Like, for real, man, just chill, relax. Again, Keaton has some moments where some edge comes out, like when he smashes Vicky Vale's vase like an asshole. Like, you really didn't need to do that to her stuff, but okay, dick. It's not until near the end of the movie, when Batman finds out it was Joker that killed his parents, that he really turns it on and goes full fuck you Batman mode and tries to kill the Joker with the Batwing's machine guns on a busy, crowded street, and then later slingshots the Joker off a helicopter all the way to the ground to his death. I mean, the man is either bumbling around house parties as Bruce Wayne trying to woo hot ladies, or straight up murdering criminals in ways that would make even Zack Snyder take pause. And even though that's of course not my ideal way to depict Batman, I do think it undeniably works for this movie. Like, it sounds like I'm criticizing all this, but I genuinely mean all of this as a positive. This is a Tim Burton Batman. You're not gonna get the hyper-tortured Matt Reeves version or the super realistic Nolan one with him. It's just not in the cards. But what you do get is what I would describe as a kind of edgy version of the Adam West Batman. He's just this casual, cool guy that just so happens to be Batman, and there really isn't all that much more to him. He wants to hang out with Vicky Vale, punch criminals, and just do his thing. The movie does not care to dive into the psyche of Batman. It's all very surface level basic stuff. What it does care about is the world of Gotham and all the fantastical, crazy shit that goes on in it. It works because the movie really isn't about Batman, so he can be this kind of inconsistent character that is a funny, normal Michael Keaton guy one scene and a psycho murderer Batman the next. He's whatever the movie needs him to be. He's the vessel by which Tim Burton explores the world of Gotham. You can call that style over substance, and I wouldn't necessarily say you're wrong, but I would say that the style is the substance. Like, how much do we ever really know about Alfred or Gordon or Harvey Dent or Knox? Nothing, really. They're there. We know Bob is a goon because his name is literally Bob the Goon. That's an easy one. He's the #1 guy. We get some backstory with Vicky Vale, but not a whole lot. We get nothing from the other crime bosses. We get the basic surface level stuff with Batman and almost nothing with the Joker. In fact, pretty much every character in the movie is totally static. They're archetypes. They end the exact same way they all started, or dead, I guess, but no one has an actual character arc. But does the movie suffer as a result of this? No, because the movie isn't about these characters as people. That is not the substance of it and not what the movie requires to make it work. What it does need is all this crazy shit and wacky moments and the incredible sets and spectacle of it all. It's a darker, longer blockbuster episode of the Adam West Show, which is why what it needs the most is a larger-than-life villain. And much like most of the Batman movies, aside from my sweet baby the Batman, this one is carried almost entirely by just that. In this case, Jack Nicholson's Joker.
And what's with that stupid grin? Life's been good to me.
It often gets lost in the shuffle these days, since we have the Heath Ledger Joker and obviously the best and most iconic version in the Mark Hamill one, and while I don't think Nicholson is on the level of either of those two, his version is pretty damn close, especially for what this movie needs out of him, which is a lot. He is a perfect crime boss 80s New York mob version of the Joker. This guy who was already a bit over the edge even among other mob guys that gets pushed even further after his accident and transitions perfectly into the Joker character. It's some classic Batman villain type stuff. No attempts at realism, just a guy literally falling into a good old fashioned vat of acid.
Jack is dead, my friend. You can call me Joker.
He really captures the fickle nature of the Joker, where he gets easily offended and distracted and feels like he has both a master plan and also is just kind of winging it on the fly. He's like the cartoon version of the character come to life. Like, I could see him doing the laughing fish scheme from Batman the Animated Series easily. He's clearly a very dangerous, menacing person, but he's also silly, which is kind of lost these days in the live action Jokers. They've gone so dark and gritty with the character in the years post Ledger that the unseriousness of the character is now this kind of forgotten lost art. The character is almost too iconic for his own good, to the point where we can't just have a casual appearance from this guy in any media. It's now this prestigious, larger-than-life Oscar bait role. Nicholson, though, just goes crazy and has fun with it. It's a very authentic, simple, scene-stealing performance, which is exactly what it needs to be.
You dropped me into that vat of chemicals. That wasn't easy to get over. And don't think that I didn't try.
Batman is very much a subdued character in this that barely says anything, so Nicholson basically takes over the entire movie and makes it a star vehicle for him. He is what drives everything. He's also exactly the kind of character you expect to inhabit a Tim Burton world like this. When he's on his parade float or messing around in the art museum with his goons or dancing on the clock tower, he just feels right at home in a way that a lot of the more grounded characters in this movie don't. But again, I think that balance of grounded elements and fantastical elements is what makes this movie work so well. So many of the characters are just regular people that have normal jobs and personalities, but they inhabit a world just a few ticks weirder than we do. It's like a dark fairy tale or a place someone had a dream about and turned into reality. The Gotham they live in is if like New York was somehow even more congested and crammed and had no central city planning, a place that just keeps getting built higher and higher beyond what anyone can control. And in that chaos, characters like Batman and the Joker feel right at home.
Without you, I just wouldn't want to go on.
So while this isn't my favorite Batman adaptation by any means, and I don't even think it has much of an interest in Batman, you still gotta give Burton credit for actually getting this thing made and it being as good as it is. It's a lot easier now for subsequent Batman eras to react and tweak what came before in the previous ones, but Burton didn't have any of that. He was flying by the seat of his pants and had blood-sucking studio heads breathing down his neck the whole time, and it not only worked, but helped set in motion the modern blockbuster era as we know it, which, you know, might not be all that good, but hey, you can't say this didn't have an impact. And like all big hits, it was bound to have a sequel.
Meow.
So after the massive success of Batman, Tim Burton went off and used his goodwill to make Edward Scissorhands, and initially never planned on coming back for a sequel, likely not wanting to deal with the process of making a giant blockbuster movie that he had to endure with the first film. Meanwhile though, WB was coming up with ideas all on their own, some focusing on Billy D. Williams' Harvey Dent as the next obvious villain. The idea of bringing back the Joker was of course in the mix, Robin was almost certainly going to be in it, Penguin and Riddler were up there as well. It was a typical example of a studio smelling money and trying to pump out a sequel as fast as they possibly fucking could. But they needed Burton, and the only way he was going to come back was if he had a greater amount of control, to which the studio eventually gave him, and what followed is Batman motherfucking Returns, baby. One of, if not the single weirdest, most insane blockbuster films ever made. Take everything I said about the first film, like how I don't think it had much of an interest in Batman and how Burton really only cared for the world and the villains, and dial all that up as high as possible, and you have Batman Returns.
Why is there always someone who brings eggs and tomatoes to a speech?
Make no mistake, this is not a Batman movie. It's just not. This is a capital T Tim Burton film as much as anything he's ever done. To put it simply, it's just insane. See, for as little interest as Burton had in Batman in the first film, there were still certain guardrails in place that kept it more or less true to the ideas of the source material. One was, of course, the studio that was not going to let him go full Tim Burton at that point in his career, and two was the writer Sam Hamm, who was a legit Batman fan and had an interest in keeping the story relatively grounded and based in the mythology of the comics, at least to a certain extent. And like I said, that push-pull between these competing interests is what I think resulted in a really well-balanced, digestible movie that still maintained a strong creative stamp. Generally, I am very much in the camp that the writer/director should have absolute control over their film because it just more often than not results in a better, more honest product, and I stand by that, but the first Batman film was a rare case where I think its compromises served it very well. And after all, Burton was more of a director for hire in that particular situation. It isn't like it was his passion project that the studio took from him and tried to smooth out and remove all the grit. It's still very much a Tim Burton movie, just not the absolute beast virtually all of his later projects are. Batman Returns, though, is his baby in every way a movie can be. Once he got full control, Sam Hamm was out of there, and replacing him was Heathers and later Demolition Man writer Daniel Waters, a guy much more aligned with Burton's cynical, weird idea of what Batman should be. And from there, they were off to the races, creating Tim Burton's true vision of the Dark Knight and Gotham City.
I am not a human being! I am an animal! Cold-blooded!
Now, do I prefer Batman 1989? Yes. Pound for pound, I just think it's a better, more focused movie. Am I, though, a hater of Batman Returns and wish it was more like the original? Not one bit.
Imagine if Matter, you have the ear of the media. Access the captains of industry. Unlimited poontang.
Despite, again, in my opinion, barely meeting the qualifications to be called a Batman film, Batman Returns is perhaps the most interesting Batman movie we will ever have. It's just so fucking crazy. Not just for everything in it, but the simple fact that this was a movie parents took their kids to see. You just can't make this stuff up.
Just the pussy I've been looking for.
It's often regarded as darker than the first film, and I suppose in some ways that is true. Like, it's certainly a whole heck of a lot hornier than the original and far more disgusting, but in most other ways it comes off even more like a cartoon than 89 did. I mean, everything in it is just so absurd. You start off with Penguin's backstory, where Pee Wee Herman and his wife have a child that is apparently so deformed and freakish, they have him in a cage for a crib, and their solution to this problem is to send him down the river Moses style to the sewer and just wash their hands of the whole situation. This, of course, ends up with Penguin being raised by, penguins, and eventually forming his own gang of freaks and other sewer residents. It's a backstory, alright. And look, I'm not precious about the comic lore or anything, and I'm down to get weird with this stuff, like hell yeah, why not? But it's shit like this that makes this movie just so fascinating, because I don't think anyone aside from Tim Burton would think of this angle to go with for the Penguin. Making him a literally human avian mutant sewer freak that communes with sewer penguins and eats raw meat is just not something the average person would conceive of. Understandably so, but that's the magic of Batman Returns, where virtually every character in the first film had limited to no characterization outside of their basic archetypes. This one puts all its eggs in that basket, coming up with some of the most bonkers takes imaginable for these characters. I mean, Catwoman isn't that much weirder herself. She starts out relatively normal as a comically clumsy, frazzled secretary that complains that she has no man in her life, and she also, importantly, wears glasses, which means she's totally not hot. Ew. You might be shocked to find out that later in the movie, this woman turns out to be a total baddie. I know, once she pops off those glasses and lets her hair down, you're just like, whoa, what? She's hot? No way.
Selena.
Now, usually Catwoman is one of the more grounded characters in the Batman mythos, being just a hyper-competent thief that has acrobatic skills, some know-how, and is exceptionally clever, but this lady goes from Miss Frizzle to Catwoman not for any typical reasons, but because she is pushed out a window to her death, or at least I'm pretty sure she did die, not super clear on that, only to be surrounded by alley cats and, I guess, nibbled on until she's resurrected as Catwoman with all the accompanying skills, making her, I guess, a zombie or a revenant or I guess whatever resurrected supernatural entity you want to go with. In any event, that's her backstory, and it's just as out there and crazy as the one they cooked up for the Penguin. She is a dead hot lady running around in sexy black leather. Why not?
I am Catwoman. Hear me roar.
Now, you don't need either of these backstories for a Batman movie to work, and if this was the first film, they almost certainly wouldn't be in there. Both of them would probably just kind of show up the same way the Joker does, and the movie wouldn't pay much mind to their characters beyond their interactions with Batman, aside from maybe like a flashback or two here and there. But, like I said, this is not a Batman movie. This is a Tim Burton film, and what he wants this movie to be about is the freaks of Gotham City. Plot-wise, there is almost no connection to the first film whatsoever. It's about as hard a reset as a direct sequel can possibly do. In Burton's mind, Batman has been sitting in his mansion waiting to be called back this whole time, which I actually do really like. Like, this seems like a thing Bruce Wayne would do if he ever hung up his cape for any kind of long period of time. So it's not like Batman is bad in this when he does show up, but he is a complete afterthought, only there for Penguin and Catwoman to bounce off of, but nothing beyond that. Hell, he isn't even the third most important character. That would go to Christopher Walken as Max Schreck, a completely original character for this movie that I guess is the real villain if you think about it, because if there's one character Batman fans were just dying to see in a live-action movie, it is a generic evil businessman whose name is a reference to the guy that played Nosferatu back in 1922. I'm not sure what to call the opposite of fan service, but whatever the word is, this is fucking it right here.
I'm a businessman. Tough, yes. Shrewd, okay. But that does not make me a monster.
The vast majority of time in this movie is devoted to these three characters, and Batman is just kind of there. Every so often he'll pop up and do something psychotic, like light a goon on fire with the Batmobile's exhaust. Like, Jesus Christ, man, all he was doing was rioting. That's like a year in county jail tops. Honestly, it wouldn't be that hard to just write Batman out of this movie entirely, and it might even be better if that was the case. Keaton's good, don't get me wrong, and he has some good moments in this, but the movie just doesn't know what to do with him, or just doesn't have any interest in him taking up any kind of meaningful screen time. He is a complete passenger in this movie's plot, which, similar to the main characters, is about as nutty a story as one could imagine. Like, it starts off at the Whoville Christmas Festival with all the town bigwigs, including Max Schreck there, lighting their town tree, and then Penguin's goons start running around making a ruckus, which of course course, does warrant death, and in the chaos, they kidnap Shrek and bring him down to the Penguin's sewer lair. Alright, so clearly Penguin has some kind of dastardly scheme he's been cooking up, and Shrek is his linchpin. Is it some kind of heist or robbery? Maybe this terrorist plot to hold the city hostage or something? Maybe he just wants to take all of Shrek's money? There's all kinds of options here, but come to find out, his big plan that required a massive coordinated night of tomfoolery and minor property damage was all in the service of blackmailing Shrek with, you know, your typical evil business evidence. So Shrek will help him go to the county clerk's office and find records of his parents. That's it?
I want to find out who I am by finding my parents, learning my human name.
I mean, it's an understandable thing for him to want to do and all, but like, you probably could have just done that without any crime. I mean, call me crazy, and sure, he also wants help re-entering society and thinks he needs some kind of benefactor to do so, but turns out the people of Gotham are pretty chill with how much of a freak he is and don't think he's this evil monster. In fact, the only person in this whole town that actually discriminates against him is Batman. Before Penguin even does anything that bad, Batman is on his ass and gives him absolutely no benefit of the doubt. Really kind of a dick, honestly. Pretty sure the only reason you're suspicious of this guy is because he's gross looking. So then Shrek helps Penguin find out who his parents are and get back into the city life, and presumably if it was up to the Penguin, the movie would just stop here. He has no more plans or schemes or vengeance to enact. He just wants to hang out in his office and mooch off Shrek, and that's probably it. I mean, I guess he might eat a cat or two, which might eventually bring the hammer of justice down upon him. Batman is liable to strap a bomb to his chest with how much he hates this guy, but he's really not all that villainous at this point. Meanwhile though, our boy Shrek is trying to get his evil power plan approved, but to do so, he needs to remove some political red tape that's currently standing in his way, a scheme of which Selina Kyle eventually discovers and gets pushed out the window for. More on her later. Shrek though has a master plan, which is to undermine the current mayoral administration by causing chaos with Penguin's sewer gang, and then putting up Penguin himself as the next candidate for mayor. Cause with a face like that, how could you not be a star in politics, baby? This is actually a reference to the Adam West show when Penguin runs for mayor, and of course Batman decides to run against him. Very normal plot for that show. Whatever activities Batman and Rose get up to in that show, he is always down to show him up at it. What an asshole. Pretty sure this also happens in the show Gotham. At this point, Penguin running for mayor is one of the main things he does, so it's only a matter of time before Matt Reeves goes down that road with good old Oz Cobb. Honestly, that would not shock me. Anyway, even though the movie up to now has been pretty weird, this is the point where it starts to really venture into cuckoo bananas land, because the sequence of Shrek giving Penguin the pitch on becoming mayor and bringing him downstairs to the campaign office is one of the most bizarre scenes in any Batman movie ever. First of all, Penguin is wearing like long johns, which is just weird right off the bat, and then Shrek is only able to lure Penguin down the stairs by dangling a dead fish in front of his mouth like a cat, resulting in this just beautiful shot. Then, while Shrek is continuing to pitch him on the scheme, Penguin spends the rest of the scene biting a guy's nose and getting insanely horny and dropping lines you would not believe were in a movie aimed at children.
Oswald Cobblepot, filling the void. I'd like to fill her void.
So the plan goes into effect, and the Penguin's goon squad starts blowing shit up downtown, and all the while Catwoman is now on the prowl for some goons of her own. Now you'll notice that I haven't mentioned Batman all that much, and that is because his impact on the plot is essentially non-existent. Again, he's kinda just there. It's not really until he sees Selina Kyle without her glasses on does he gain some agency in the story. Not in a way where he's actually doing a whole lot, but at least he has some drive, which, you know, is just being thirsty for Catwoman, but hey, it's more than nothing, and frankly, who can blame him? I mean, goddamn.
Life's a bitch. Now so am I.
So then Catwoman and Penguin meet up. Now they decide that they need to get rid of Batman, so they kidnap the town baddie and frame Batman for pushing her off a building, and then Penguin hijacks the Batmobile remotely and sends Batman on a joyride through the streets of Gotham, complete with amazing shots like this. Love to see it.
Maybe this is a bad time to mention this, but my license is expired.
So now Batman's PR is in the toilet, which I guess somehow means he's out of the way. However, unbeknownst to Penguin, Batman recorded a damning clip of Penguin talking mad shit about the people of Gotham, and like a true political campaign, Batman dumps it on the public and tanks Penguin's PR himself. That's politics, baby.
Sorry, pal. That's politics.
So the now shunned Oswald returns to the sewer and decides, fuck it, I'm gonna kill everyone, and begins his new plan to have his army of penguins with rockets blow up Gotham after Penguin steals all the firstborn sons of its people. He gets revenge on Shrek, even though Shrek literally didn't do anything to him, and Batman, of course, eventually stops his plans and kills him. Then Bruce pulls his rubber mask off and tries to get Selina to come with him, but she says no and kills Shrek and presumably herself, but actually she's still out there, and that's the movie, the end, roll credits. Now, I wanted to lay out the whole plot, not just because I'm a hack YouTuber that needs to pad the runtime, love that, but because you need to understand that this absolute ridiculous cartoon nonsense is apparently what qualified as too dark back in the day, which is just hilarious, but is also kinda true. The movie is so insane that it simultaneously is this gross, disgusting, horny, dark nightmare, and is also just as silly and nonsensical as the Joel Schumacher movies or as bonkers as the Adam West era. It is a cinematic depiction of madness, the likes of which we have never seen. But it's also kind of incredible for it because it's somehow not the worst movie ever. There is scenes of a man eating a raw fish while watching his penguin soldiers march into battle, and other scenes of Michelle Pfeiffer licking Michael Keaton's face, and totally normal scenes of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle having a romantic evening by the fire, and by some miracle, this is not a tonal mess. It all just works in spite of its complete opposition to the ideas of sense and logic. Watching it feels like a fever dream where the next day you'll think to yourself, was there a scene where Christopher Walken convinced a monkey to let him out of a comically large birdcage in Danny DeVito's sewer lair? And then you realize, yes there was. And it was glorious. Unlike Batman 89, that was a seesaw act of grounded somewhat realism, and the absolute insane over-the-top performance of Nicholson's Joker, Returns is what happens when the inmates take over the asylum. The grounded elements of this one, if there even are any, are oddly enough the characterization of Penguin and Catwoman. For as ridiculous as DeVito is in this, there is a real element of humanity in the character that you don't expect to endear yourself to as much as you do.
I'm just jealous because I'm a genuine freak and you have to wear a mask.
I joked a lot about how Penguin barely even did anything that bad for most of this movie, and while that is a very funny element, especially with how just needlessly suspicious Batman is of him at first, I think most of that is actually intentional. Like, he's not really a villain in this, certainly not in the way that Joker was or how most Batman villains are portrayed in movies. He's just this gross, ugly freak that's rejected by society and ends up lashing out when he realizes he won't ever have a place in it. It's like the Looney Tunes version of the Joker movie, but arguably even more impressive because they managed to get that same point across while also having him be the grossest character of all time.
So what are we waiting for? Let's consummate our fiendish union.
Similarly, Selina Kyle is also a character on the fringes of society, embodying many of the traits women are told they should be: quiet, agreeable, pleasant, not making her opinion heard, etc. And that leads to her having a deeply unfulfilling life where even though she fits herself into what society wants her to be, she still ends up punished for it. So, as a reaction, she takes ultimate command of her life and lives in spite of who she was before, becoming this radical hyper-exaggeration opposite of her old self.
You make it so easy, don't you? Always waiting for some bad man to save you.
For how over the top these characters come off, the movie still finds a way of making them extremely relatable and surprisingly deep. As much as I love that first movie, there was just nothing there character-wise even close to this, which again, I know sounds crazy since this movie also features scenes where Michelle Pfeiffer legit puts a live bird in her mouth and Danny DeVito does this, but you know, that's just the magic of Batman Returns and the magic of Tim Burton, really. Again, I don't think Tim Burton really cares all that much for Batman. I'm sure he appreciates it and thinks it's cool enough to do a movie and all, but he's far from a die-hard fan, and Returns is very emblematic of that fact. Pretty much nothing in there has any basis in the comics, and if it does, I promise you, that is not the intention. This movie, and hell, even much of the first one, is little more than a giant playground for Tim Burton and his friends to play on. Thing is though, that doesn't really matter because in spite of his lack of love for Batman, he still made 2 pretty good Batman movies. And frankly, that's the case for pretty much all the Batman movie directors. There's always this surface level appreciation for the mythology and the most iconic stories, but aside from Matt Reeves, every other person that has helmed a Batman era doesn't have that passion and fandom, which is why, at least for now, Reeves is firmly my favorite of the bunch. But the advantage of bringing on people like Tim Burton who aren't these die-hard fans of the material is that you get a totally fresh and unique vision for the world that couldn't come from the mind of a fan.
Here came along a fellow in Tim Burton who liked the original material and liked the comic material and had a sensibility because he was a graphic artist. He came out of that milieu. So he had a sensibility about the material, and yet he'd already made films, and quirky, unique films. There was a danger in that because it didn't look like what everyone thought it was. But the value of that was the imagination and the intuition took everybody to another place.
Sometimes it helps to have someone who isn't emotionally attached to any of this shit and has less preconceived notions of what things should and should not be. Granted, that can also lead to absolute disaster, you know, can't win them all, but in the case of this era, it produced some of the most wonderfully bizarre blockbuster films ever made, so I can't complain too much. The best thing about the Batman film franchise is the variety, and you can't get variety without having some Looney Tunes installments like these, so hope you all have a very spooky Halloween, and I'll see you in December for another big-ass Batman video. Keep an eye out.